Hello everyone. Today we're going to be talking about the topic of carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are very important within our bodies as they help us with a lot of things such as cell communication. They help us form ATP, and they help us with other biological processes such as growth, reproduction, etc. So it's very important to realize that carbohydrates play a huge role within our bodies. And the reason why they are so important is because without carbohydrates, our bodies cannot live for over an extended period of time. Because carbohydrates are the main source or the primary source of energy within our bodies. Aside from ketones and all of that we will mention further, carbohydrates are really important. It's the main source of energy that our body relies on. So, firstly, let's look at the structure of carbohydrates and what's within carbohydrates. So, firstly, every carbohydrate, no matter what, will have these three elements, and these three elements only. It'll have carbon, it'll have oxygen, and it'll have hydrogen. These three elements will be present within every carbohydrate, no matter what. They will be connected by covalent bonds and whatnot. So, like I said before, quick disclaimer, if you haven't learned about electronegativity, polarity, and how double bonds work and all that, please refer to other websites regarding this because we're sort of going to be skipping those small little topics. So to get an overview of general chemistry, please refer to other websites that I will be posting within my website. So, firstly, let's look at what's the basic formula of a carbohydrate. So every carbohydrate, no matter what, will have this formula. Okay, sorry, that's an N right there. So basically this N is a really big issue here because the N here, depending on how many carbons a carbohydrate contains, how much every particular carbohydrate it contains, that's how it will affect the structure and the amount of elements every carbohydrate has. Suppose it's a 6-carbon carbohydrate. If we do basic math here, let's just do this. Sorry. This 6 will be distributed to the oxygen, to the hydrogen, and the carbon. So the final chemical formula will be C6H12O6. That is also, guess what? That is also the chemical the chemical formula of glucose, which is a monosaccharide. So depending on how many carbons a carbohydrate contains, that's how the formula and structure can differ from each carbohydrate. So, firstly, now let's look at what monomers and polymers and stuff are. So, firstly, single carbohydrates are called monosaccharides. Just for the sake of this video, this is a hexose carbohydrate. However, we're gonna understand that topic later. This is a single monosaccharide. Every carbohydrate by itself is called a monosaccharide. Sorry about that space. monosaccharide. Monosaccharide. It's very important. And when more than one monosaccharides are connected together, this covalent bond right here especially in carbohydrates, we call these glycosidic bonds. These are called glycosidic bonds. Glycosidic bonds. And these are called disaccharides. Sorry for my horrible spelling. not spelling, sorry. Yeah, just the way I write. I apologize for that. Anyways, that is called a disaccharide. So disaccharides can be lactose, and they can be maltose. Single monosaccharides can be glucose, galactose. Very important to differentiate them. So, and what do we call the final form of saccharide? We found out that these were monomers. These were monomers and small chains of polymers. What do we call large, complex carbohydrates? These are called polysaccharides. Polysaccharides. Sorry about that A right there. My A pronunciation. Sorry, not pronunciation. My spelling is really bad for A. I apologize. Anyways, that's what polysaccharides are. So polysaccharides are complex carbs or carbohydrates. They're complex carbs. And the reason why they're so important to understand is because many chains. Let's just do this 1 second. We're not going to draw everything out like that. A lot of monosaccharides connected with one another are called polysaccharides. Or when a lot of monomers or monosaccharides connected to each other are called a huge polysaccharides or polymers of those monomers, basically. So monomers, if we want to summarize what we just said, monomers are the basic subunit of every macromolecule. In this case, it's carbohydrates. Many chains of this are called polymers or polysaccharides. Many polymers are polysaccharides. It's very important to differentiate between all of them. And yeah, basically we explained what these are. So now that we sort of know what disaccharides are, polysaccharides are, and monosaccharides are, we can now get into more complex topics. Sorry about that. So firstly, let's look at, like we were talking about before, when we were talking about chemical formulas, let's look at different types of carbohydrates. If it's what if it was a 3-carbon? Let's make a chart here. 3-carbon, 4-carbon, 5-carbon, 6-carbon. Let's differentiate between that, and depending, like the formula I gave you before, which is CH2 and O. Then the N is outside. So if it was 3, if the N variable here is replaced with 3, and if you distribute it and do all the math, the first one would be C3, as 3 is distributed to C, H6, because 3 times 2 is 6, and O3. So it'd be C3, H6O3. Now you can do the math for the rest of them, and you'll find out all of their chemical formula arrangements. Not arrangements, sorry, my apologies. Just their chemical formulas. If you realize one big pattern here, you realize that the carbon and oxygen have the same amount of particular atoms. The only different thing that happens within each particular difference is the hydrogens. Oh, sorry, I made a mistake here. This is supposed to be an 8. I don't know why I wrote that. My apologies. Anyways, you'll realize the oxygen and carbon will have the same amount of particular atoms for each one. So for the first one, what do you call this? The 3-carbon one is called a glyceraldehyde. second one here, the 4-carbon one, is called thyrose. The 5-carbon one is called ribose. The last one is called glucose. So remembering these names does not really matter. Well, what the important part here and why we want to know it is because 3-carbon, 4-carbon, 5-carbon, 6-carbon, these the number of carbons within every carbohydrate determine the arrangement of every carbohydrate that we see here. This is very, very important because many different types of maybe starches or complex carbohydrates arrange from each individual carbohydrate here. So, sorry, I don't have a dry erase eraser, sorry, so my apologies for that. Okay, now that we got over that, let's look at the chemical arrangement of carbohydrates, which is very, very important. For example, let's pick glyceraldehyde. Let's pick the first one we saw from the chart. O C H H O H C H. Sorry about that. Now, like I was talking about earlier, what are now that we got to the concept of basic chemistry again, let's look at what functional groups are. Functional groups are basically small molecules that are connected to make one big compound. So let's differentiate what different types of functional groups that are present here. So whenever we have an oxygen and hydrogen connected by a covalent bond, these are known as hydroxyl groups or hydroxyl functional groups. Due to this, they can have many properties that are differentiated due to the compound. And functional groups help us understand that. Depending on different functional groups, they can be hydrophilic, they can be polar, they can be non-polar, etc. So another functional groups we see here is, see this double bond between the carbon and the oxygen? What is this known as? This is called a carbonyl group. Carbonyl. C-A-R-B-O-N-Y-L. Sorry, I have to spell it out because my handwriting is very bad. My apologies. And this is hydroxyl. And however, there's another functional group here too. You can't really call these functional groups a little bit. These little H bonds connected to the main carbon are called simple hydrogen bonds that are connected with carbon. Like I repeat again, we're not going to go too in depth with how covalent bonds work, Lewis dot diagram, and all that. You need to refer to other websites. However, another functional group that's also present here is this aldehyde group. This double bond with the carbon and the oxygen along with the hydrogen make what? Guess what it is? It's an aldehyde group. Just like I said once again, when you have different functional groups, the properties for that compound also change, which is very, very important. Now that we went over that, let's look at something else. Let's look at the fact that there could be different types of glucose isomers. Isomers. Different, not glucose, any carbohydrate isomers. Many carbohydrates do not have isomers. Isomers basically mean they have the same chemical formula. For example, for glucose, C6H12O6. This chemical formula for alpha glucose and beta glucose, which are two isomers of glucose, they will just have different arrangements of these elements within each carbohydrate, which is very, very important. Because understanding them, like I said, allows us to build other complex carbohydrates and whatnot. So two big differentiations between these two. are, for example, let's look at this. This is alpha glucose. This is alpha glucose. This is alpha glucose, and this is beta glucose. They have the same arrangement of C6H12O6. However, within alpha glucose, the hydroxide group is on the bottom side, while in beta glucose, the hydroxide group is on the top. And within alpha glucose, the hydrogen is on top, and within beta glucose, the hydrogen is on the bottom. So it's very important, as we just saw, isomers can range depending on different types of carbohydrates. Some carbohydrates may not have isomers, and some carbohydrates may have isomers, which is very important to understand. Now, now that we know about how they work and whatnot, depending on, like I told you before, depending on this, suppose 3 carbon atom, 4 carbon atom, 5 carbon atom, not atom, sorry, 3 carbon carbohydrate, 4 carbon carbohydrate, 5 carbon carbohydrate, or 6 carbon carbohydrate. Many things can happen. For example, 5 carbon carbohydrate, such as 5 carbon carbohydrates such as ribose, it will have a structure that looks like a pentagon. Hexose, or the one, basically a hexose carbohydrate, will look like this. And so on. Different carbohydrates can have different shapes depending on how many carbons they have. So now let's look at depending on different types of carbohydrates. 1 second. We'll do one for hexose. We'll do one for hexose, or just a glucose one. So this right here is called the glycosidic bond that we were talking about earlier. And it's very important to understand why, to differentiate between the covalent bonds that are within the carbohydrate and why these are called glycosidic bonds. These are also called covalent bonds, but to differentiate between chains of polysaccharides or disaccharides, we need to call these glycosidic bonds. So they can be broken apart by hydrolysis reactions and dehydration synthesis reactions, or anabolic and catabolic reactions. They are monitored by enzymes. We will talk about catabolic and anabolic reactions within further videos, as this basic video only talks about general concepts of carbohydrates, because catabolic and anabolic reactions are related to metabolism, and we'll talk about that in further depth as we understand what enzymes and stuff are. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you got a great understanding of what carbohydrates are, and hopefully you understand other topics as well. Thank you so much, and have a nice day. Bye.